Okay, we're going to work on the worksheet from 3.3. We're going to do part A right now. It uses the remainder theorem and the factor theorem, which are located in your book. So for part A, it says factor the following polynomial and then solve the equation f of x is equal to 0. Okay, so we want to factor this. To start off, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and plug this in my calculator just to get an idea of any x-intercepts or zeros. So I'm going to go ahead and, again, put this polynomial into my graphing calculator. Okay, which I already have in there. So you may want to pause and go ahead and put this in. And then for my window, just to show you what I have, for my window, for x I want from -5 to 5. For y I want from -60 to 20. I just kind of play with that ahead of time. Okay, now if I graph it, I should be able to tell what kind of x-intercepts I have by looking at this. So we can tell by looking at the graph that this looks like an x-intercept, so -2 looks like an x-intercept, and also 3. So those are two possible x-intercepts that we want to start off with. Okay, so let me take this off now. Okay, oops. There we go. Okay. Okay, so by looking at our graph, we could tell already that -2 and 3 are zeros. Okay, so we're going to start with dividing by the -2. So I'm going to use synthetic division. I'm going to divide by x plus 2. Using synthetic division, I just put the -2 there. And I'm going to go ahead and put this polynomial in here using synthetic division. So I'll put a 1, -7, 9, 27, and -54. Okay, so using synthetic division, I bring the 1 down. -2 times 1 gives me -2. I add those together and I get -9. -2 times -9 gives me 18. 18 plus 9 gives me 27. -2 times 27 gives me -54, and if I add those together, I get -27. -2 times -27 gives me a positive 54, so I get 0. Okay, so right now, this polynomial changes. Instead of being this, I have two factors. I have this factor, which represents x plus 2, and then that means it's a 0. It's an x-intercept. And I also have this factor. Now, as a reminder, when you divide, you always want to start with the coefficient 1 degree less than the original polynomial. So since this is to the 4th power, this will go along with x cubed. So I'll have x cubed minus 9x squared plus 27x minus 27. Okay, now I'm going to factor it further. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to factor this part. I'm going to factor out the x minus 3 from that. Okay, so inside here I'm going to go ahead and put these coefficients. So I have a 1, -9, 27, -27. Okay, so far the information that we were given is that -2 is a 0 or x plus 2 is a factor. And now we're going to look and see if 3 is a 0 or x minus 3 is a factor. So I bring down the 1. 3 times 1 gives me 3. -9 plus 3 gives me -6. 3 times -6 gives me -18. 27 plus -18 gives me 9. 3 times 9 gives me 27. And so oops, let me erase that there. Put a 0 there for no reason. Okay, there we go. Okay, and if I add those together, I get a 0, so that means 3 is another 0. So I'm going to rewrite my polynomial. I have this factor. I have this factor, which is x minus 3. And then finally, I have this factor. If you remember, this corresponds to x cubed, so this should start with x squared. So I have x squared minus 6x plus 9. Okay, now we're left with a second degree polynomial. We can either factor this, or if it doesn't factor, we can actually set it equal to 0 and use a quadratic formula. This one does factor, so let's go ahead and factor that part here. So I get the x plus 2, x minus 3, and then this factors to be x minus 3 squared. Okay, so if I were to rewrite this, I have x plus 2 and x minus 3 cubed. Okay, so let's go back and make sure we answer the question here. This first. Okay, the first question was to factor the polynomial. We already did that. The second step is to solve the equation f of x is equal to 0. So I'm going to set this equal to 0. This gives me the answer -2, and this gives me the answer of 3. Okay, so that solves the second question. Now, to kind of add on something from the previous section, what this tells me is that -2 is a 0 with multiplicity 1, and 3 is a 0 with a multiplicity of 3. Okay, so that concludes this part of this worksheet.